Welcome today. Duncan Baker Brown is described on his LinkedIn page as an architect, an academic, an author, and environmental activist. Would you say that was all true?
That sounds correct to me, yeah. Well done.
Okay. You're also co-founder of BBM Sustainable Design Limited and a senior lecturer looking at sustainable architecture at the University of Brighton.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I've taught and researched and practiced around sustainable design, sustainable development for over 25 years.
Okay, so I think today we possibly need to focus on the impact of COVID and with a specific reference to commercial real estate and how COVID is going to change future design. So it would be good to hear your thoughts on that. I think we're now at the stage in the pandemic where it is accepted 7 months on that this is going to affect design. I think short term, obviously, but I think going into the long term as well. So what are your thoughts about new approaches?
I think the question that's been asked today is one of the fundamental ones. We've got tens of thousands of square meters of empty commercial office and other space in our financial districts in cities at the moment. So it's interesting that the shops that are busy are the ones on the periphery of city centres, the rural shops, the county town shops. These are the busy places now. So the City of London is empty, and one of the reasons is it's defunct functionally at the moment, because so many people who commuted there every day now realise they can work from home. However, I think after 8 or 9 or 10 months, whichever way you look at it, of working in isolation, we do need to come together as work colleagues occasionally as well. So I think, though, to go back to the actual question, the effect of coronavirus, which I see as all part of the climate and ecological emergency, I think they're all part of the same thing. We've got to adapt those spaces so they're relevant for the future. We've got to design COVID-proof places, actually, at the end of the day, whether that's external spaces or buildings.
The norm sort of pre-COVID was very much co-working, wasn't it, to move a group of people together?
Yeah.
How can that still be achieved within a sort of a COVID-safe environment? Or do you think the emphasis now needs to be on perhaps an office not necessarily for working in, but for more perhaps as a creative hub or as a meeting place?
Yeah, well, I'm already working on projects where we're looking at doing exactly that. So in effect, it's a lot of spaces that are shared. So obviously you've got the sort of hygiene issues to deal with, but that's a sort of sub issue. But really what people are looking for already are spaces where they can meet on occasion, where they need to meet face to face, rather than places that are their destination for a commute every day. And so that puts a huge emphasis on the redesign of existing spaces, which are, they're designed to be dense to allow a lot of people to occupy a square mile or whatever it is of a city centre at the same time. That just doesn't need to happen anymore. So there are it's an opportunity now, I think, to design different sorts of spaces. So we don't need to have so many people per square metre in our buildings. So therefore we can open them up a bit. It's also, and that's at the scale of the building, but the scale of a place, including the sort of urban landscape, we've got the opportunity to introduce more green spaces, more public realm, because it just does not need to be as dense anymore, because these places, a typical working pattern moving forward might be that you meet your team once every other week or once a week, and the rest of the time you're working somewhere else. So there's a burden on these other places where we work to work properly, sort of home offices or whatever it is, to work properly, because if you're not in a place or a space set up for working and living, it's been a big pain working the last 8 or 9 months. If you happen to be in a place that can accommodate it, it's been bliss for a lot of people. So but I think designers need to step up now. I think it's a primary issue, because it's at the moment, the way, if it's not working for you at the moment, it's affecting your mental health and your physical health and the general well-being. And I think we've got an opportunity now to say, look, this is how we can make our city centres work. But they do have to change. I mean, there's at the moment, I would say there's a lot of redundant commercial office space at the moment.
And how easy is it to implement sustainable design within a revamp of an office post-COVID? What elements need to be addressed?
Well, I think a lot of commercial offices are set up to be easily adapted from the point of view of their interiors. So partitions and are easily demountable. So I think it's about reconfiguring spaces rather than sort of tearing out the whole of an interior. So I mean, what I spend a lot of time looking at and working on with our projects is the idea of existing buildings and places being material stores for future buildings and places. And I think that's exactly what we need to do now. We need to appraise the buildings that we've got that to a greater or lesser degree will be defunct in terms of their function. And we've got to carefully tweak them in terms of sort of from a design point of view. And by carefully, I just mean we do not need to tear interiors out. We need to carefully remove them. And I'm working with people and on projects where we're doing exactly that.
What kind of technology can now be put into a building, and also energy saving devices? How can that be quickly and easily put into a building? Is that a lengthy process, a costly process?
Not necessarily. No, we're talking about. I mean, at the big sort of level, at the sort of national level, our mains national grid electricity for a lot of this year has been 60 or 70% renewable energies. So it's got a lot cleaner than it was 5 years ago. So electricity is, you know, in terms of sort of energy generation for heat and power on site, is the number one source now. So you can forget gas and oil, and because electricity is clean now, so we can use that. So at one level, there's slightly less emphasis on each individual building cleaning up their act, because the source energy is going to be in our mains is a lot cleaner. So we can be slightly less preoccupied with the need to generate so much energy on buildings. But I think buildings still need to be able to do that. But no, a lot of it is in terms of the digital now, because if we're going to have buildings that are partially empty for whatever reason, because there's going to be a transition period. I mean, you know, people are already reoccupying spaces, but there are vast areas of spaces that are not. So we've got these huge empty buildings that are being heated. So that's and then, you know, we're coming into winter now, so that's where it's going to be even worse. But moving forward, yeah, it is easy to create zoned approach to your building interior. So you know you can have a building that's in terms of your timetable, you know it's going to be, you know, the rooms are going to be used today, therefore you heat them today to the temperature they need to be, but they need to be on a lower temperature when they're not being used. I mean, that sort of thing is the sort of details of mechanical engineering, really. So we can do that already. I think the bigger question really is how not, if we've got tens of thousands of square meters of defunct office space, some of it not even, you know, some of it on site, not even built, you know, completed yet. There's loads of building sites out there. What we don't want to do is just sort of clear fell it, just demolish it all. You know, that's just dumb. So it is, designers now and architects need to step up and say, actually, that building there that you wanted as pure commercial office space, we can now use as something else. And you know, for example, I was at a meeting yesterday. We're looking to do a new school in a city, and we're looking to work with existing buildings rather than build a new school, because we know
so it's very much a repurposing of the space that is already there to a large extent.
It's the sort of work that interior architects do all the time. They work with existing infrastructure. So if we think about it as a sort of built infrastructure, and you know, what can we recycle, what can we reuse, what can we adapt, and what's perfect as it is. It's just you know, it's just a sensibility. So what we don't want to be doing is tearing down lots of buildings to accommodate a new sort of way of living. But I think we might be adapting. You know, perhaps we're not going to need so many car parking spaces. So perhaps there's some of those open air car parks could become real parks. So you know, we've got other opportunities.
And in terms of the emphasis on not just demolishing buildings and starting from scratch, the circular economy, how far is that being embedded in the architectural world? are architects looking now very much more carefully at materials and what can be reused, would you say?
Yeah, I think Alison, I think it's a really interesting time in the UK right now, because this year we've got a bit of a consensus with the Royal Institute of British Architects and LETI, which is the London Energy Transition Initiative, and the UK Green Building Council, all coming up with the same sort of carbon descent plan to get us to net zero carbon by 2050. And they talk about the embodied carbon in a building or in a material and product, as well as the operational use of carbon, which most people get their heads around. You know, how much energy do you consume? But the amount of energy and materials and pollution that's gone into the making of a brick or the making of a pane of glass, that's part of the equation now. So to meet those targets, as a sort of 20, 30, 40 and 50 targets, you're going to need to understand the embodied carbon figures of the building you're proposing. And one way of reducing that is to not use new materials, is to use materials where you've already invested in the carbon footprint. So, and that might be by not demolishing the building you're working with or adapting it, or by using secondhand materials as well. Now, there's a lot of people in this country this year in the world of architecture getting their heads around that now. And for example, I'm working on a circular economy route map for Brighton and Hove City Council at the moment, which is for the construction sector, which will demand those sorts of principles. But you know, London's already got a circular economy route map as part of its plan. So I think in the UK, we're getting our heads around it and thinking about it and understanding why it's important not to throw buildings away, to design them so at the end of their life, they're a material store for new buildings. I think we're getting our heads around it now. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands and in Germany and even in France, we've got examples of buildings that are built like that, but also people who are, and these are people I'm working with, people who are, for example, deconstructing the World Trade Center at the moment in Brussels. That's big commercial buildings that instead of being demolished, they're taking a bit more time, they're deconstructing it, and really it's only taking a couple of extra months to deconstruct these towers, and then they're selling the material. It's online. So
yeah, and that was going to be my next question really. Is retrofitting more expensive than demolishing and starting again? But I suppose now, looking at the overall picture with the embodied carbon, etc., as you mentioned, it's going to level that cost out.
I think so, because I think it would just demand a different sort of sensibility, sort of way of doing things. So I think where developers and architects and their clients would have said, right, we're going to just demolish this building and start again. Architects would be saying, no, hang on, the structural frame's fine, and there's look, the lift core's fine. There's a lot of it that's fine actually. Let's not do that. Let's just adapt what's there. And we know that's actually a smarter way of doing of developing a site. So if we're doing that, we'll be saving money. I mean, there's one little, well, not so little thing, but there is an issue with VAT, because if you work on, I mean, there are ways of avoiding it legitimately, but if you're working on commercial buildings and you're working on an existing building, you have to pay VAT at 20%. Whereas if it's a new build, it's zero rated. So you know, that's especially a problem with in the housing sector. But if you're adapting existing buildings, that's just a different sensibility, I think, and I think we understand that now. And there are plenty of interesting projects from Europe and even emerging in the UK that are doing exactly that. And I think those projects are getting a lot of traction at the moment, a lot of publicity. For example, I wrote a book 3 years ago called The Reuse Atlas, which is subtitled A Designer's Guide Towards a Circular Economy. And that was full of case studies of examples of recycling and then reuse and then reduce, where you turn up at a situation and you don't demolish, you just reuse what's there. And so there's the reduce refers to not using so much natural resources. And then the fourth and best step is proper closed loop systems, circular economy. Now that book's been republished in the new year, and it could be 4 times the size now in terms of case studies. I've been inundated with case studies because there's a lot going on now there. So there's a lot of big projects and citywide projects looking at how cities can turn their linear systems where stuff comes into the city and then is just dispersed and thrown away, turn it into circular systems back on itself. So it's definitely happening. It's not always to be honest, it's not always the cheapest thing at the moment because of the way the tax regimes that I just mentioned. However, I think what people are going to realise is, and local authorities who, around the UK, it's about 90% of local authorities have declared the climate emergency, and then also stated that they want to be net zero carbon by 2030. Those local authorities are the people in charge of commissioning schools and housing and other major projects. And they need it from a political point of view. They need those projects to be complying with their ambitions to be net zero carbon. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is just not turning up at a place and demolishing the building and starting again. With all those resources going to landfill and incineration, that's one big carbon footprint. So to have cleverer strategies around reuse and adaptation of the buildings is going to get your carbon levels down immediately. So I think local authorities would demand it. Therefore, the people who are building their buildings, developers and such like, will have to comply with that. And they'll realize in a way it's an easy win to reduce your carbon footprint. And that folds exactly at the same time we've now got COVID. We've got to sort of learn how to design and vision sort of COVID-proof space. I think the same sort of sensibility is required for that as well.
So you would feel that the momentum now is sufficient to mean that these options are realistic, circular economy, reusing materials. In terms of sort of being halfway up a mountain, would you say you can see the top now?
I think the industry can understand what the challenges are now. So yes, seeing the top of the mountain, not exactly knowing how to get to all of it at the same time, all of it at once, as it were. I think we've got the questions that need answering are what's the sort of physical and digital infrastructure that supports a circular economy. And again, there are examples of that emerging. But this time last year, the Major Infrastructure Projects Group produced a paper which presented a case for a resource exchange. So at the moment, you've got really large contractors who they swap materials amongst their own sites, but with a resource exchange, it's a lot of surplus materials knocking around big building sites and small building sites. And those are just the sort of materials, if you've got more plasterboard than you need, what do you do with it at the moment? You throw it away half the time. It's never been used. Well, if it was this resource exchange, you could sort of swap it with another building site. They might have something else that you need. So you get this thing in somewhere like the City of London where there's one building going up and another building going down next to each other. In a way, they could be feeding off each other. They would in a second.
There are many positive elements, I feel, from speaking to you that are now coming together to build a bigger picture that is far more positive going forward. And perhaps COVID has given us the pause that we needed. And earlier in the year, for the first time in many, many years, everything did stop and the air did become cleaner, and people, I think, became more aware of their surroundings, which can only bode well for going forward, looking at how the elements that we need to build with, I think, do need to be more sustainable and coming from a more equitable base, really, not taking immense amounts of carbon to then be locked into a building. So I think that we're at the stage now where we can stop and look. And I feel very much, having talked to you, that is, as you said, we've now looked at the challenges and I think people are aware of what needs to happen. If you were to sort of look at this, where would you like to see us in 10 years' time?
Well, at the moment, the construction industry is pretty much half of the world's the sort of natural world's problem. We consume half of the raw materials mined and harvested every year, and we create half the carbon emissions and everything associated with that. So in 10 years' time, I'd like to be in a world where it's commonplace to deconstruct rather than demolish. It's commonplace to adapt rather than deconstruct. Where we've got the digital and physical infrastructure to allow the sort of second-hand material to be readily available for reuse in new buildings and in retrofit projects. The legislation around tax VAT especially would have been changed, because government will see the potential in doing that, the potential for them. And we won't be real, you know, we will not be having, as a human race, we'll not be having to sort of burn down rainforests for short-term gain as far as beef production and things like that. And because that, you know, it might just, the rainforest and the beef is one thing, but there's also temperate forests and access to limestone, for example, just to create cement. So, you know, I would hope that within 10 years, we'll understand the consequences of our materials choices a lot more. When I say we, I'm back to the construction industry again, because we need to understand the real impact of saying, I want that door handle or that finish on the wall or whatever it is. And we need to trace it back to its origin. So it's all about understanding the supply chain.
Perhaps things should have now an ecological mark.
Yes, I think we've got to be taxed around that. In fact, in terms of how you, I think there should be a sliding scale on VAT, and you should be charged VAT, more VAT, the more it should be like a carbon tax at the end of the day. So if you can transform a building down to net zero performance targets, you shouldn't be paying VAT. And it should give, and if you can't do anything, if you can't improve the performance of it at all, you're paying VAT at 20%, because that VAT would be to be used to sort of offset the problems we're creating.
Well, thank you really very, very much for talking to us today, Duncan. It's been very interesting, a real illustration, I think, of where we are now and how we need to go forward. So perhaps we should reconvene in 10 years and see exactly how much we have achieved. But thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Thank you for speaking.
Thank you. All the best. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.